this year, Peace and the Politics of Memory, and came out with Manchester University Press. My name is Orly Friedman. I'm an associate professor at the Faculty of Media and Communications, FMK in Belgrade, and a professor at SAT, the School for International Training. And before we start our roundtable, I would first ask our presenters to please each present yourself briefly so we can get started. I can see you all on the screen now.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Johanna Mannegren. I'm really happy to be here. I am a professor of political science and international relations at Södertörn University in Sweden.
Yes, hello everyone, and warmly welcome to this book launch. I'm very happy that we managed to organize this, so thanks to Orly and Memory Studies Association. My name is Annika Björkdahl, and I'm a professor of political science at Lund University. So yeah.
Thank you. Stephanie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie Kapler. I'm a professor in conflict resolution and peace building at Durham University.
Thank you. Susanne?
Hi, Susanne Backli-Sissel from the University of Marburg, Center for Conflict Studies. I belong to the people with the technical problems. So I'm somehow in the audience and on my mobile phone. I'm enjoying it twice. Also from me, many thanks to having us really and to doing this with us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Team. Are you still with us, team? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay, great. This is off on the computer. I'm Tim Williams, technically inept, but a junior professor of insecurity and social order at the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich, in Germany.
Wonderful. So our plan for this evening is to open a discussion among the authors of this very interesting and inspiring book, followed, of course, by a space for the audience for Q&A at the end. And so I would first would like to offer a number of very brief thoughts before I begin our, the format will be questions and answers of the authors to give you the stage, of course, to speak as much as we can hear from you today about this new book. So this book is an excellent read for scholars of peace and conflict studies, memory studies, and scholars teaching and conducting research in comparative politics. The authors of the book draw important and generalizable observations across different cases and across time and space concerning the relationship between memory politics and peace. As I know well, most of you and your work, your previous work, it was a most beautiful read in a sense of being able to trace the ways in which each of you advanced your arguments based on years of in-depth knowledge, in extensive periods of field work, bringing local knowledge into your theoretical framework, which is innovating and very challenging. These are extremely challenging times to speak about peace and peace building. The word peace, it seems to me, the word peace itself has been removed from global and local political agendas and everyday discourses worldwide, and even more so within societies experiencing war, violence, and war crimes as we speak now. So in this sense, I believe your book makes a very strong claim by choosing to place peace and its quality at the heart of your inquiry. And I will turn actually to you first if you want to share with us, in fact, what the book is about as you want to present it to us. Also, if you can tell us more about your collaborative research. This is a very unique project written by 5 authors together. So if you want to tell us a little bit about the process of your work, what was it that brought you together to begin with to write this book? And can you share some of maybe your lessons learned or takeaway from this process?
Thanks, Orly. I think I will be the one to to open up this, and I really appreciate, Orly, that you place this conversation in this very bleak and difficult situation that we are facing at this moment in so many different ways. And it does feel important to speak about peace at this moment, and also about memory politics. And I think that all of us are peace and conflict scholars in one way or another, and we have all in our work, and we have sort of known each other for a long time, we have increasingly become more and more involved and interested in memory politics. And of course, seeing how important the remembering of the past is when it comes to making or breaking peace. And we saw a need as well to have a more sort of deep and possibly more systematic study about this connection of peace on the one hand and memory politics on the other hand. And we could see that in our field, there is, of course, a lot of research, especially from transitional justice perspectives, that looks at the past, but possibly from a more sort of instrumentalist point of departure. And then all the readings we have been doing in the field of memory studies, we thought there were many really fascinating sort of in-depth studies, but maybe less attention paid to peace and how memory politics affect peace. So we thought that there was, a need to more systematically look at this. And that's really how we started this project. And I also have to say that thanks that we got funding from 2 Swedish donors in order to actually look closely at this connection. So thanks to the Swedish Research Council and the Swedish Research Foundation, RJ, for making this work possible. And I thought, just so to begin, to make it a little bit more easy for everyone to follow the discussion, to just sort of share the sort of basic skeleton of the points that we make in the book. So it will sort of enable us to have this discussion. And I will then just briefly share just one slide, no big PowerPoint presentation. So let me see. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great. So I'll just quickly go through these really about, what we really then, as I already said, how we seek to understand then how politics of memory impacts peace in societies transitioning from a violent past. And to do this, we wanted to find a systematic way of analyzing how memory politics can contribute to just peace, or on the other side, and the perpetuation of conflict. And to do this, then we sought a framework that could actually look at, in a much more dynamic way, intersections of sites, agents, narratives, and events, because we found that a lot of studies would focus on one or possibly two of these components. And then we, as a next step, we identified what we call mnemonic formations, and we'll get back to all of these concepts. But these mnemonic formations are kind of a sort of diagnostic sites from where we can analyze how memory politics play out. And we've chosen then mnemonic formations in our 5 case studies: Cyprus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Rwanda, Cambodia, and South Africa, which of course are very different, but they do share this working through a conflict-affected, a past of conflicts. And then we analyze to how and to what extent memories are entangled in ways that are conducive to peace. And we look at these entanglements, and comparing across cases, then we arrive at, we can see that plurality, inclusivity, and dignity are 3 key features of what makes memory politics conducive to peace. So these are the different steps, and now we'll go through them. But then I think, first of all, to say something more about our collaboration around these questions.
Thanks, Johanna. I'm taking over to talk about our collaborations, and also thanks very much for asking this question, because I do think there is a lot to be said about the process in which we brought this monograph, the five of us, this monograph together. And I think to all of us, it has been very important to actually do this. And when we talk in political philosophy increasingly about the politics of care, I think that maybe this is an example that care and politics of care can one of you be a part of not just research, but also doing academia. So 4 quick points I want to make. The first one is about when we initially started the book, some of us had already collaborated, and all of us shared in one way or another similar ideas, standpoints, perspectives. So us coming together kind of intellectually wasn't a great endeavor, but we were already pretty much kind of on the same wavelength. Probably pretty much all situated in more critical peace and conflict studies and criticizing the liberal peace agenda. That's something we all brought together to this group, and that, in a sense, I think it was a kind of on an intellectual basis, a foundation for equality, for trust, for kind of respect of each other. So at no point was one of us trying to come with ideas the others weren't happy with. We always engaged with each other, discussed, and came out with hopefully good results. Down to you to judge. But I think it helped that we already had similar views when we began. On the personal level, it took us a little while to write this book. We had lots of ups and downs. We had personal ups and downs. The world had downs. We also went through COVID and the Corona crisis. We had serious ups. 3 babies produced within that time frame. Other more grown-up kids we had to look after. So there's also a friendship that developed between us in that course of many years writing. And I think I can speak for all of it. It's very dear to us, and I think it contributed also to us being able to do this together, even when at some point some of us had to disappear for a while and then came back, but there was no resentment, no remorse, just pulled it together. On a structural basis, Johanna already referred to the SAME framework, which we'll explore a little bit more in detail later. SAME came to us pretty early, so we came up with SAME at a fairly early stage in our thinking together. It was part of the funding process. Johanna already mentioned that was successful. And there were moments where we didn't really like SAME much, but it worked for us because we could also use it not just as an intellectual scaffolding, but also to structure the monograph. And I think that is really important because we have different case studies, very different cases. So we had this analytical framework, saying size, agents, narratives, and events that helped us to structure the data we actually found on the ground in inverted commas very much like for researching. And then last point about doing it together, we will present some aspects of this book individually, but really the whole book was written by us together. And when I looked at Johanna's first slide, every bullet point started with we, and it was very much we. Everybody wrote everything, and even the case studies, even though there were some people did the first draft, but other people in the group knew something about the case and added something, correct, asked questions. So it's really, it's not an edited volume, just something that we did together. Yeah, I mean, to us, it was a great experience. We hope it was a good read as well. But that much, thanks for asking about collaboration, because I think it's really important. And sometimes it doesn't go that well. I think we come out on the other side in a positive way. Obviously, we don't know all about all the projects we don't make it, but it works for us as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I think I must admit, seeing you in action as a group of authors in previous conferences, but also kind of then entering into a deep read into the book, it comes across as a project that is a result of great creativity and joy of working together. I'd like to turn to the next question with you and think a little bit before we enter the frameworks and the theoretical foundation of your inquiry, but to think about the moment where we are at now. And I think I join you and I see you as colleagues from critical peace and conflict studies, in fact, in leading voices in the field right now who came to memory studies from years of work in critical peace and conflict studies. And in that sense, I think in the last 3 decades, we are witnessing profound changes in the international peace architecture, IPA, what we can talk about more, and its ineffectiveness and the critique of the liberal peace and the liberal international order, which is actually for us at the heart of our inquiries as scholars of critical peace and conflict studies. And this all, of course, has highlighted the setback in international peace building, resulting often in frozen or stalemate peace processes. And in that sense, I want to ask you, how do you understand these changes and how those have shaped your choice to place peace, yet only not just peace, but to kind of articulate the quality of peace at the center of your book?
Thanks, Ollie. I'll start with that one. I think it's probably no secret that the failure of the liberal peace has never been as obvious as it may be today. And I think that's a very important question that you're asking, where the international order seems to be very much driven by geopolitical considerations and where peace has become sort of the sacrifice of these considerations. And the liberal peace, as much as it has glorified certain ideas and blueprints, it doesn't seem to have delivered for the majority of people who are at the receiving end. And I think one of the problems is that it's very much attached to the old blueprints, certain set of ideas that people consider important for peace, but very much unaware of the challenges to it. Peace has very rarely been able to link with mobilizations of resistance, very rarely been able to link with claims for repair, reparations, and historical justice. And I think that's perhaps very evident at the moment that this has created quite significant obstacles or blockages to the liberal peace in itself. So I think our contribution is really to open up such issues about historical justice and injustice to peace studies, looking at the politics of memory in an attempt to include more in-depth conversations about complex histories, entangled histories. So this is not about any form of generic peace, and I think that's something that's long been promoted, but has also long failed. But it's about a very concrete and specific quality of peace, which may be different in different societies, in different configurations, relationships. But really asking questions about who's included in the making of peace, who's represented in peace, and what's the relational setup of peace at the end of the day. And we feel that if we are able to reconfigure the discussion about peace through memory politics, we are able to capture new actors, different agendas, and perhaps more context-specific histories and memories. We're able to get at some of the nuances of this. And we feel that a piece which is built on an awareness of memory politics and the very complex contestations around this, the claims for justice, really helps us to open up this discussion about what a high quality of peace actually means to different people at different points in time. But I'll let Annika continue that conversation a little bit, if that's okay.
Thank you, Steph, for this. Well, I agree with, of course, with what Stephanie said, and I think the importance here is that we sort of read peace through the lens of memory politics, and I think that, as such, is quite innovative, and it helps us to see what memory making do to peacemaking. So there is this connection that we're interested in exploring. To get a better way of thinking or rethinking what peace is. And our ambition, like Stephanie said, is not about, constructing a generic or abstract piece, but rather to look at what is peace and how is it connected to memory politics in conflict-affected societies, transitioning out of conflict into something else, and what that something else is going to look like. And I think what memory politics do to our understanding of peace is that it helps us link peace to understandings of the past, to the present, and also to imaginaries of peace in the future. And these sort of imaginaries are connected to, as Stephanie also said, to justice and different interpretations of justice. And our interpretation of a just peace relies on plurality, dignity of the victims, and inclusivity. So this is pretty much a concrete version of what peace can possibly be. And I think, with the temporality that we bring to peace studies by using memory politics is also one of the contributions that this book is making.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think the question of just peace and the way you specifically chose to treat it and unpack it for us comes very clearly, of course, in the last chapter where you bring it all together, and we will get there soon with our discussion. Let's move forward, if we can, together to speak a little bit more about the frameworks that your book offers. And I think, again, for me as a read, this was it unfolds throughout the chapters and eventually makes a beautiful sense when it all comes together. I think the frameworks that you offer are going to be extremely useful and helpful for students and scholars of peace and conflict studies interested in memory studies, and the other way around, right? If we can hear from you a little bit more, first about the mnemonic formations, and each of you chose a different mnemonic formations. One of the things I was asking myself as I was reading it, could I take one into the other? And it also, I think, also helps us reflect on our own work, on my own work as I was reading your book. But what are mnemonic formations, and how did you come up with those? So let's start with the mnemonic formations, and then we can move on to the SANE framework.
Thanks, Orly, for that question. I'll try to begin to say something about what we think is a mnemonic formation. And I think it really goes back to what Stefan and Annika were just saying about how we need to read peace from its sort of concrete manifestations, to not have this sort of abstract kind of sense of what peace is. We need to sort of pin it down and find a way of understanding how it sort of plays out. And so looking at then memory politics in the same way, we thought that instead of beginning with looking at like the narratives around memories, or let's find the particularly salient topics in the memoryscape that we can study and begin to unpack. And they can be very different, as we see in the book, but there's some phenomenon, some topic, some issue that draws together agents, narratives, events, and then they are pinned down to certain sites. And how we then selected these ones, I think we wanted to have something that would then say something about these particular societies. And of course, that builds upon a deep understanding of these places. So it's not something that we just pick out of thin air, so to speak, but it's actually something that's based on how we decide this is a sort of a diagnostic site, you can say, how we can analyze the wider memory politics through this particular focus. And that's how we came about to choose them. And also with sort of an important point about the mnemonic formations is that they can be about very different things, as also our cases did illustrate, but they do have the same kind of function of being these sort of salient topics. And that makes it, we think, we'll come to that later, I think, but it makes this kind of thinking and analytical frame very sort of versatile and able to move from different contexts and in different times.
Wonderful. So let's move. Actually, we can, based on that, move forward to the actual framework, which comes together nicely if we call it SANE, right? And it offers us to look at the analysis as a frame for analysis. Sites, you bring together sites, agents, narratives, and events. And I think this is the heart of your study, of course, as you sort of put this inquiry into the relationship between memory politics and the quality of peace. So if you can tell us a little bit more about the choice of the framework, what it's made of as beneath these titles, and then I think it will nicely lead us into your actual case studies afterwards.
I can start with the frame framework. So as we have repeated many times, S stands for site, A for agency, N for narrative, and E for events. And I said earlier when we're talking about cooperation, collaboration, that we were struggling with the same network, and that had to do with the fact that these aspects are, of course, very closely intertwined. It's really hard to separate them. So we separate them for heuristic purposes, for analytic purposes. And we do find there is a lot of value in looking at these 4 components of our diagnostic science, like separately, but then bringing them together, even though at times it's a little bit difficult to write a text because they're so closely entangled. But let me just start with, and one of the reasons why we do that, why we look at these 4 components, because we started, and I said it earlier by way of introduction, we started looking at literature that deals with similar topics. Their publications being maybe space, maybe agency, maybe narratives, or maybe events, and we felt there was always something missing, so we wanted to bring the 4 components together into them. Let me begin with sites, and then we take it in turn to talk about different components. Sites, very basically, they're in memory to sites, they're places where something is commemorated. So in that sense, they are material representations that are invested with meaning through social practice. People do memory at a particular site. So it's this particular social practice, and here's the link to agency, that makes a site relevant as a memorial site. In these sites, they can be authentic places or not authentic. They can be memorials, they can be graves, they can be museums, there can be natural objects such as trees or hills. It can be digital. There are lots of digital memorials around now, so they can take any form and shape and size. Often they always want to communicate a particular message, and they sometimes do this without explanation. But others use displays, exhibitions, artifacts, sometimes human remains. We have that in the case study of Rwanda, but also Cambodia, where human remains are part of the site. So there are places where people go and learn something about the past, but there are also places where people go and feel the past, where memory hurts. So they're not just cognitively important, they're also, many of them, not all of them, and not everybody, of course, they're also effectually important. The focus on sites helps us to explore the social construction of the different memory agents, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a second, what agency actually means in the memory context. It tells us something about their needs, their strategy, their politics, and they might include just a struggle for recognition, maybe to fight for some form of symbolic reparation. There might be just a place of mourning, but also there might be a side where governments try to create a nation around a particular symbol. And I hand over to A, and that is Tim, and maybe we've lost Tim, I'm not sure.
I think I'm going to talk about agents.
Oh, okay,
yeah, but it's good. I'm going to be very brief, because when we talk about agents, we suggest that essentially, ultimately, memory is driven by people, and that's what we have an interest in. You could broadly say we talk about memory entrepreneurs, but we don't only talk about professionals, but about people who carry, amplify, or silence memories in their everyday lives. And some of the chapters are quite deep into the everyday dimensions of memory making in terms of how people go about the small acts of memory making that have big political effects. But of course, that doesn't mean that we think that everybody's on the same level playing field. Of course, there's power differences between different actors and agents in the making of memory. And some are, of course, more powerful than others. And we actually explore that through the case study chapters, where, there's states involved, companies, individuals, the media, and so on and so forth. And the power hierarchies between those are kind of key insights into the politics of memory, but essentially also the politics of peace. And in a way, these different agents negotiate how the past is being dealt with in different arenas through different narratives and different events.
And I'm happy to say a few words about narratives as they are told and retold by these agents. And the narratives that we are interested in are, of course, the narratives of the past that are evoked in memory politics and sort of the ones that underpin mnemonic formations. And what is quite interesting is to see how certain narratives become dominant ways of interpreting the past. And these are sort of then creating a meaningful order in the present. And although there are dominant narratives of the past, these are constantly mediated, translated by various agents, as Stephanie said. And we argue that these narratives cannot be seen sort of in isolation, but they have to be seen in relation to power and different types of power structures. And we come to the conclusion that one of the more important actors in constructing these narratives of the past is often the state, right? Because it has this unmatched capacity to shape narratives of the past. So in some of the chapters, we pay more interest to the state, or more attention to the state. But we also look at violence of the past that is not necessarily very prominent in the narratives of the past. So certain violence are more silenced or left in the margins, and we try to sort of address these and capture these narratives that are constructed perhaps by memory agents in the past. And we think it's important to also listen to these less privileged voices and narratives.
Okay, wonderful. Do we still have Tim? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, I hope I'm still here. And yeah, I'll
We
maybe
can
say a little
hear
bit
you.
about.
We
Excellent.
can't see you, Tim.
My camera's on. I can see myself.
Okay.
I think we'll just have to go with you just get to hear my voice then. Sorry about that. Yeah, so events is the fourth element of the SANE framework, and we understand events as temporarily circumscribed manifestations and practices of memory politics. So it's really about practices, about performances, about what people are doing in spaces, and how they create meaning through these practices, through these events, also as part of an identity building process, right? And so inherently, they are temporally circumscribed, right? They happen at a certain time, and they can be planned, they can be spontaneous, they can also repeat, but they're not constant. They're at a certain point in time, and thus also located in a certain space. So often it's the sites that we were talking about earlier, but which have specific meaning, but they can also spill out into other spaces and try and co-opt these spaces as well. And really the events are given importance or signified through agents and are then embedded in broader mnemonic structures that they then uphold or that they challenge through the events themselves. And as I said, they can be plans, they can be very ritualistic, they can be choreographed, or they can be much more informal, fleeting, ephemeral events. Often they employ various different cultural symbols and art and so on and so forth. And one of the interesting things that we see when we're analyzing these events is that audiences become part of the meaning making process. And so this means that we need to think beyond maybe the very classical agents from the state and who are particularly imbued with different types of power, to also see how others co-constitute these events and thus also participate in identity building exercises and are then part of either creating, strengthening peace or undermining it.
Okay, thank you, team. Thank you for all this kind of, I think it comes together very clearly, and this is a nice shift towards our discussion about your case studies. And actually you chose 5 case studies which are kind of at the heart of the book. And I think your selection offers a very rich empirical data and shows a very nice and coherent implementation of your theoretical frameworks. I wonder, I would ask each of you maybe to share about your own case study and chapter, maybe your choice of the mnemonic formation, kind of tell us a little bit more about that, and also maybe an insight, because there's many insights and the material is so rich, but maybe if you choose to share with us at least one insight from your case study chapter that you would like to share now. There is, of course, also the comparative aspect of all of it to bring it together. So, I mean, I think if any of you want to comment briefly on that too, but maybe first the actual mnemonic formation and your insights. And I don't know who will go first.
I think I have the
Okay.
pleasure of going first. Thank you for introducing it so well. First of all, I want to say something about the case studies as such, and that is that we've done extensive field work and we know our case quite well. But one of the reasons why we know them so well is that we have had great collaborations with researchers in the specific cases, as I have had in Cyprus with really prominent experts on Cyprus. So I've had the benefit of drawing on their knowledge. And I think all of us have in various ways been collaborating with researchers that know these cases well. So I think that is also something that we want to recognize. But one of the reasons why I chose Cyprus is because this is an interesting case, although it has been widely researched. I think it is an interesting case in the way that we see a connection between memory politics and peace. I mean, the case is characterized by the colonial legacy of the British, interethnic violence between the Greek and the Turkish Cypriots. It's a frozen conflict, numerous of peace initiatives, peace talks, and stalled peace processes that, makes this for a really interesting case to think about, because there is such a rich history, unfortunately, of violence, and trying to come to terms with this has been difficult. So in the sense in Cyprus, what we see is that memory making in Cyprus and the contestations around the past has been such an obstacle to peacemaking. And that has led it to be this frozen conflict. And I think this is one of the reasons why Cyprus was selected as one of the cases. And when it comes to selecting the mnemonic formation in the case, which is the actual case study, that is that we sort of try to unpack what are the obstacles in our recollections of the past in Cyprus. And it turns out that a lot of the memory making is connected to identity, nationalism, and so forth. So what we see in Cyprus is basically two parallel pieces, one in the north and one in the south. And these pieces are underpinned by understandings of the past that are quite connected to nationalism. So contested nationalisms and parallel pieces is the key in Cyprus. And if you want me to say something about the insights from researching this, is that to me it was striking to see how these two mnemonic formations, one in the north and one in the south, how they closely mirror each other. And I think these mnemonic formations, they're quite dominant, and so that is why we focused on that. But also in the shadow of these dominant mnemonic formations, there are counter memories, alternative ways of interpreting the past and acting on the past, with different agents that are sort of in the margins of the memoryscape. And they construct different narratives and different recollections of the past. And some of the memories that are more bringing people together than divisive memory making is memory making that relates to the everyday coexistence in Cyprus, or, for example, cross-border memories. And there is also migrant and diaspora memory making in Cyprus, which is quite in the margins. And other minority groups in Cyprus, their recollections of the past is also not part of the dominant, pretty much state-shaped memory making and mnemonic formations. And I think that is an interesting insight from this case. And in Cyprus, I think it becomes really important that we, by analyzing memory politics in Cyprus, we can sort of attend to the more fine-grained dynamics of assessing and evaluating the peace process and try to sort of unpack the frozen conflict in Cyprus. And in a way, memory politics here becomes sort of a seismograph of peace. So I think I'll stop there with Cyprus and leave over to.
Yes, and thank you. And I will continue with the Bosnia-Herzegovina and the mnemonic formation of the siege of Sarajevo. And most of us in this group have been following with great interest and also doing research in the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I think, and I'm sure a lot of people listening as well, we have been seeing since the end of the war in many ways a situation that's maybe more sort of frozen than ever before in these two sort of or three or sort of camps, where a lot of the memory politics is about how to establish the other and the sort of the enemy. Looking at the siege of Sarajevo, we were also able to unpack some other kinds of dynamics within these, within the memory politics of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which we thought really did add something to our understanding of the present very difficult peace in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so, not to go through all of it, but I think that one aspect is that you can, by applying the same analysis to the memorialization around the siege, we could see that one very strong narrative that has emerged is how the understanding and the memory of the siege has become increasingly militarized and framed in a much more of a sort of nationalistic kind of narrative, with agents who are state agents, who are military agents, and so on. Whereas another strand more tries to remember the siege as an event where people's resilience, ordinary people's experiences of war, and the fact that civilians were like the targets of this violence. And what does that mean when you have these different types of narratives and these actors? Well, you have the sites that commemorate these in different ways, and you have events, the commemorative events in the city. And we could see that actually, compared to a lot of other memory politics in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is much more space for contestations and moving around within this commemoration around this mnemonic formation. And we could see that actually the entanglement of then different memories were actually much more entangled than in other aspects of the memorialization processes in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I think that's one thing that we were able to see, and we could then also define these aspects of inclusivity and dignity and plurality as really important parts of making to see how this piece was formed in this situation. And so just to end, maybe say something about the agents that we see. So I already mentioned like the state and military agents, but we could also like maybe a little bit surprisingly see how tourists as external agents come into as participants, but also sort of becoming, by being in place at these sites, they also participate in making the memory politics, and also somehow then challenging and listening to certain narratives and others. So that's also one way of seeing how these formations are dynamic and change over time. So I think I'll stop there.
We can't hear you, Susanne.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
I just said I changed my cable. Can you hear me better? So I guess the answer was not a... Hang on a second. I understand the quality is not that great, but I'm sorry, that's the best I can do for now. But you can hear me, right?
Yes.
I will talk about the Rwanda and the economic formation that we identified in Rwanda. We looked at the role of the internationals, and we chose the role of the internationals because we felt there was already a lot of memory work, research on Rwanda, but this is a particular topic that has not been considered in research yet. So we had to contribute something new with that as well. Why the role of internationals? The internationals feature in Rwanda's memory discourses in several ways. We've identified 3 ways that are very crucial. And what's important about the way the internationals feature in Rwanda is that they are in the way the past is remembered, are kind of the culprits of the genocide. They're being given a lot of responsibility for the emergence and the way the genocide unfolded. By saying this, we don't want to say that the internationals in the past, during colonialism or during the genocide or in the present, don't carry any responsibility. Quite the opposite. What we want to do is to show how the memory discourse draws that into the focus, and what focusing on this and not so much on other things actually what that leads to and what the consequences are. So we identified 3 ways in which the internationals feature in Rwanda's memory discourse. First, they feature as colonizers. The narrative is that Rwanda was colonized by Belgian colonial powers. At the time, there was no kind of separation between ethnic identity other than maybe social. But with the arrival of the Belgians, they decided, so that's the narrative, they decided that the ethnic groups of Hutu and Tutsi are different ethnic groups, and entered this information into documents such as IDs and treated these groups differently as well. So in the remembrance of the genocide and what led to the genocide, there's one of the tropes is that the internationals actually created the groups that were central to the genocide. The genocide in Rwanda was committed in 1994 against the Tutsi by perpetrators out of the group of Hutu. Not every Hutu was a perpetrator, of course. Second, the international feature in the genocide discourse because they failed to stop the genocide here. The narrative is that United Nations, under the leadership of Romy Dallaire, were already in the country, but they did not intervene to stop the genocide. They were not allowed to actually physically, militarily engage and stop, kill, arrest genocidaires. And in addition to that, the Belgians actually removed their troops as well. So the United Nations in particular are very much in the focus of this particular narrative. And the third narrative we identified is that that the French, as the internationals, were very close to the government that was ruling Rwanda prior to the genocide of Habyarimana, and supported. So the allegation, the narrative is that the French actually trained genocidaires, helped and supported also with weapons to prepare for the genocide. But also during the genocide, they created something that's called Centre of Croise, in which genocidaires, like a buffer zone in the fighting, to which genocidaires could then withdraw and were kind of safe in a sense. So these three narratives we find a lot in various memorial sites. We see pictures of Romy Dallaire for the United Nations. We see photographs of identity cards. We see a copy of the cable Dallaire said to the UN. We see images of Belgian missionaries or colonizers in various groups of people. But it's a very strong and repetitive theme find across many of the larger memorials that also have exhibitions. When it comes to agents, and that also shows why this is problematic, the memory scape of Rwanda is very much dominated by the narrative of the government. So the government is very instrumental when it comes to, as an agent, when it comes to forming memory. It also works with an institution, commission, that is there to oversee memory discourses. There are very, very few local agents and counter projects that challenge this hegemonic narrative. And they also don't have space to do this, all the way to there being a law divisionism where any form of descending from the government narrative is penalized. So what does this kind of assessment or description of the memory scape Rwanda tell us about the non-formation of the internationals, tell us about the entanglement of those memory strands, quality of peace? What we concluded is, and it's something that we find a lot in the literature, not saying that it's something brand new we've discovered, that is a very hegemonic discourse by the government that diverse opposing interpretations of the past in a country that is very diverse, like every country that is very diverse, in particular after a war, after conflict. And through not allowing a plurality of different versions and forms of memory, they stifle this, and we conclude that the quality of peace on the basis of this in Rwanda is actually fairly low. That much for the case study of Rwanda.
Thank you.
I'll continue with South Africa. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try to do it as concisely as I can without going through all the different elements. But hopefully, if you're interested, you can always read our book. The mnemonic formation we chose for South Africa is colonial legacies, because in a way what seems to be striking is that there is a lot of scholarly attention being given to apartheid and the memory of apartheid, which makes sense, but also we felt that it kind of limits the spatial and temporal reach of investigation to a seemingly secluded and compartmentalized period of time, and also locates the problem sort of away from the global north. It's a South African problem, apartheid, rather than the longer term issue of colonialism that still has impacts on society today. But it also, this mnemonic formation also ties in with some of the contemporary political movements, such as the Rhodes Must Fall movement and other political pressure points and frictions that are very articulated in South Africa today. I guess in a nutshell, what we found is that overall, the view and the memories around the legacies of colonialism are very divided. In a sort of essentialized way, you actually do still see very strong nostalgia being expressed for colonialism, expressed through different sites and narratives, events and agents. And on the other hand, much stronger pressure to deal with these historical injustices and what they mean for people. And what you find then is that there is very limited entanglement between these different strands of memory, but they're fairly separate. There is very limited acknowledgement being given to the suffering of those who've actually experienced colonialism from the side of being colonized, and that actually makes any kind of attempt at peacemaking very difficult. Because although there is some hope in the sense of, you could say, different sites emerging aimed at reconciliation that largely tie in with the idea of the Rainbow Nation and the ANC's vision of reconciliation, these narratives are fairly directed at international audiences who like to join in the celebration. Johanna talked about tourists who actually play an important role in this, but in the absence of wider structural transformation and reparations and reparative efforts, that remains very much marginalized in the wider, very much divided memory politics. And there is very limited acknowledgement of the harmful effects of colonialism and its legacies, which in turn really undermines the dignity of those victimized by those very policies. And I think I'll stop here.
And I'll quickly, again, like Steph said, because of the time, try and be as brief as possible. But the last case study that we have in the book is on Cambodia, and we chose the mnemonic formation there on the power of the dead. So it's a little bit different to some of the other things we saw in the other chapters. And particularly, we were looking at how bones and spirits are perceived as part of the larger memory scape. And that's really the mnemonic formation that we're focusing on. And really the idea is that after the genocide of the Khmer Rouge in the late 1970s, the new government came into power and preserved many of the bones and skulls in memorial sites or mass graves, not exhuming them and cremating them, despite the fact that in Theravada Buddhism that is practiced in Cambodia, the spirits really need to be released through cremation. And so in essence, this was deeply distressful for many communities of people living close to mass graves or close to memorial sites where bones and skulls were being held. And given the amount of people who were killed and died during the regime, basically there were mass graves close to most people's living spaces. So particularly in the 1980s, this was very distressful and really undermined the dignity of both the survivors and the dignity of those who had died and who were spirits who couldn't be released back into rebirth. This sort of comes to the fore from time to time in the government. It's very useful to the government because the skulls and bones serve to shock and to remind of the terrible past, and thus the role of the government in ending that past. So it serves a legitimating function today. But for instance, past King Sihanouk was quite active in trying to advocate for the spirits and for the survivors who were being tormented by the spirits to have them cremated. This hasn't happened, but I think that we managed to, in the book, show that the way that these sites are used and the narratives which are transported about the spirits and the bodies or the bones really signifies how there is a a difficult peace, an uneven peace in Cambodia, which highlights the peace which has been brought in the absence of violence through the government of Hun Sen, but doesn't deepen it through the ideas of dignity being afforded to those who have passed away and those living in parallel with the spirits. I think one last word, what was quite interesting in the discussions that we had around writing this chapter is, what do we do with these spirits in terms of attributing agency to them? Because within the Cambodian memoryscape, they are very real and they are very present, and they are afforded a certain degree of agency. But of course, from sort of other perspectives, we'd sort of say, well, okay, do we want to really engage with non-human agency? Anyway, so that's a little bit of something that we also talk about in the book. Maybe as I was the last one to speak on the same framework, I can maybe say just a very brief word on the fact that we have 5 cases there. And what we really tried to do is we didn't just write them together, but we then tried to analyze them in parallel to each other in what you can term a thick comparison. So we really go into the depth into the 5 case studies and then try and put them in conversation with each other across the cases, and try and create what we call thickening contextualizations, and to really try and bring the insights that we have from the same analysis across the 5 cases and see what it means for our understanding of peace. I'm not going to go into any more depth on that as I'm aware of the time, but just give you the logic of the comparison there.
Okay, thank you. And I think the way you ended, it means get a copy of the book and get into the depth of the chapters, right? They're having read through very carefully. They offer very, I would say, insightful and well-structured kind of journey through the same framework. And again, they're structured all the same, which was very interesting for me, and offer the conclusions at the end. I think the time is just right for us to open more questions for our audience. We have some more questions and topics we wanted to discuss, but maybe it will come up in the Q&A now. So we invite you to turn on your camera if you want, and turn on your mic when you ask your question. And let's see what we have from our audience. While people think about possible questions, there's one question already written in the Q&A chat, so I can read it for you. This is for Joanna, for your chapter. Can you elaborate a bit more in which ways has the memory of the siege of Sarajevo been militarized?
Yes, thank you. I think that if you look at, well, let me start with one of the main kind of sites of commemoration that also attracts a lot of tourism, and that is the Tunnel Museum, which is a tunnel that was dug by the Bosnian army to transport goods and people and so on, as the only sort of way to get out through the siege. And as of a few years back, that museum is now under the auspices of both the Sarajevo canton, but also with some influence from military actors, because I mean this tunnel was from the beginning built by the military, but it was run by the family who lived in the house where the tunnel ended, and they're still part of running it, but they are not in charge anymore. And you can see that increasingly what is on display are more military kind of aspects and narratives, and so on. So that's one way of how it is framed, and it's often talked about then that this the siege was, it's a story about how the military was so successful in actually in the end defending the city, instead of focusing on like ordinary people's resilience and aspects of trying to survive during the siege. But I mean, as I said, it's not a hegemonic, absolutely overpowering narrative. There are also very strong contenders to this narrative at various sites. For example, the War Childhood Museum that talks about the siege from a very different sort of everyday kind of experience of children during the war.
Hey, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay, then I'll try to. I think we do have few more minutes, so I will introduce maybe additional questions you can discuss, but maybe a brief before we get to maybe speak about your conclusions. I wanted to ask if you could share your choice of the image on the cover of your book. If you want to tell us something about that.
Should I say something about that? I also think I'll
Please.
be brief because I think there's another question in the chat.
Okay.
Should I hold this just in the camera? Can people see this here? This is the cover image of the book. Just for context, this is a Freedom Park in South Africa. This is a symbolically quite interesting location. It was sort of built as part of, again, the discourse I referenced earlier on the Rainbow Nation, the idea of reconciliation and inclusivity, you know, which is one of the aspects we really discuss in the book. It stands on a hill adjacent to the Voortrekker Monument, and the Voortrekker Monument is the one that all the tourists go to. It's the one that holds a lot of nostalgia for colonial rule. It's the kind of monument that was erected to commemorate sort of the great trek, you know, of the Afrikaners towards inland South Africa. So the government had decided, rather than tearing it down, they would build another more inclusive monument on the hill adjacent to it, and they are now linked by Reconciliation Road. So you've now got Freedom Park, a sort of more conciliatory monument that really aims to be inclusive for everybody. And there is the specific image you see is a memorial wall. It's a wall, you know, there's different ways of commemorating where, for example, there's different walls, but this one commemorates the victims of the South African War to also ensure that there wasn't just white victims, as in some of the more traditional forms of remembrance, but there was also black victims, and, you know, because there was a lot of black people who were asked to fight on the side of the colonizers, basically. We quite like the image also for the visuals, because it kind of shows this narrow path, the limited options sometimes, but also the sort of the complexity and not knowing what's around the corner, really. So this kind of narrow path. So it has a bit of a reference to some stuff that we discuss in the book, but it's also, we thought it's symbolically quite interesting, sort of the difficult, long, winded, narrow path. But I think Susanne has something she wants to add.
Go ahead, Susanne.
Not so much on the cover, but
Susanna, when you hold this, it's a little bit better. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't want to add something to the cover. Thanks, Steph. But the book is actually open access, and I don't know how to put something into the chat. So maybe Tim, you can do that better. You can put the link, the open access link, into the chat. So I think you forgot to say.
You can just add the link to the book in a Q&A section and everybody will see it.
I don't know where the Q&A section is. I have two screens, but maybe I'll find it. I'll try.
Okay. I do see we have another question. Let me read it to you from Anna Katila. I hope I pronounce this correctly. The authors refer to the idea of good quality peace during the presentation, and she's wondering whether you can elaborate on how the idea is understood in the book. What does good quality means here?
I think I can start and begin addressing it, and then my colleagues can follow on. I think it's very difficult to say good quality because the way we think of peace is how it's, in this case here, when we read it through the lens of memory politics, is to see how peace is actually shaped by sort of a highly dynamic and complex use of the past. But what we do see that brings some kind of quality to the piece is whether the piece is reflecting an entanglement of memory. So, and if this then entanglement of memory includes plurality, dignity, and inclusivity, it allows us to draw some kind of conclusions about the quality of peace. And the way we reason around it and the logics of it is that dignity, plurality, and inclusion are qualitative values, and entangled memories that hold these values, they sort of brings us towards a quality piece or a good quality of peace. And then I think there are others that can dig deeper and explain more.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of words on each of those elements. I mean, because that's really what I think we found was key, like Annika was just saying, to understand how a quality piece, which means a very different thing in each context, but across the 5 cases when we were thinking of quality of piece, or where it is not achieved in that sense, these 3 elements of plurality, dignity, and inclusivity were really what came up. And unfortunately, also sort of their counterparts also as well, in the sense of plurality versus homogeneity. So we're looking at how different diverse memories and communication practices can coexist with each other or not. And particularly when we have a more homogeneous system or context, it risks marginalizing and silencing various different memories and not affording them the recognition which they would need. Here I mean, in several of the cases in Cyprus and in South Africa, we have very bifurcated memory. In Rwanda as well, although it's much less obvious there because I think sort of 1/2 of the bifurcation is much more marginalized. And we argue that we don't just need a sort of a plurality in the sense that memories exist, but also that the memories entangle in a way which is inclusive, that recognizes alternative interpretations of the past, that they exist, and that there's a choice to engage with those. And so this is basically based around dialogue, about trying to recognize other people's realities and also the identities which come out through that. And that ultimately then also affords dignity. It dignifies the memory, it acknowledges memory of other people, and thus plays into identity. It counters dehumanization of victims. It creates solidarity. And really, if we dignity is all about sort of it's a relational property that the memories can engage in and come together and sort of allow people to feel recognized, to feel acknowledged, and thus act together. And that would be sort of a core to what we would say is a quality piece. Johanna.
Just on cue. No, I was just thinking when you were talking about this, I think it really is quite striking that we found this, because this is really like a sort of result of our studies, that we could draw this out from all these different, as you could hear us when we spoke, very differing mnemonic formations, and find these aspects of peace and aspects of memory politics that seem to be so central. And I think that's it's something to hold on to, something to understand, that we need to concretize when we speak about peace. Just to, Orly, you opened this discussion about saying that peace is something that we don't really talk about, that is very abstract in a sense, and I think that in this book, through these case studies that we have gone through using the same framework, we have actually managed to pin down some aspects of that tell us something about the quality of peace through looking at memory politics.
Thank you. I wonder if if you want to add anything just before we close the session. We do have 2 minutes left. If there's any additional comments one of you want to make. Okay, so I would end by first quoting one sentence that stayed with me from your the chapter 7, when you bring actually all your analysis together, I think in a very complex way. And you say the quality of peace can be assessed by the way memory is entangled in and through mnemonic formations. And I think this is kind of a nice way to bring together, in fact, from where we started and your say what brought you together as a group of authors to work on this book together, and what the work you did, I think, to give us some new frameworks and new materials to think about, and eventually how you end the book and how you suggest entanglements, and of course through the issue of the 3 primary facets of plurality, restoration of dignity, and inclusivity of the victim. So I want to thank the 5 of you for presenting your work and making us think, and making us, I think, more curious to get the book and delve deeper into it. And of course, thank you to the audience who joined us today, and we apologize for the technical challenges at the beginning, but I think eventually we managed to all come together and discuss the book. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks to you, Ollie, for doing this with us. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks.